1971, a corporate lawyer named Lewis F. Powell changed the course of American history forever with a memo. You see, in the decades before, America had become more equal at a faster rate than perhaps at any other time in our country's short history. In 1925, A. Philip Randolph founded the first African-American labor union, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, and in their act of labor solidarity, planted the seeds for the Civil Rights Movement. In 1935, the Social Security Act was signed. The program quickly became the most important anti-poverty plan in America. FDR's New Deal policies were followed by President Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society programs like Medicare and Medicaid, which were established in the mid-1960s. In 1964, Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, which of course outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. And by the early 70s, the women's liberation movement was in the crest of its iconic second wave. The economic picture was similarly progressive. The top marginal tax rate in 1960 was 91%, and don't panic, it only applied to folks with an income equivalent of about $1.5 million in today's dollars. Union membership was climbing, and the gap between CEO pay and worker pay was about 20-1, as compared to 300-1 today. So, in 1971, when Lewis Powell sat down to write this famous memo, he had a lot to be worried about. You see, Powell was a conservative lawyer who was about to accept President Nixon's nomination to the Supreme Court. Powell and his class allies were concerned about the direction America was heading in. It was becoming more equal, both socially and economically. Ralph Nader's book, Unsafe at Any Speed, had sparked a consumer advocacy revolution, and Powell, who sat on the board of a tobacco company, Philip Morris, wasn't wild about the idea of consumers getting more rights. So, what to do? Well, on August 23rd, Powell drafted a memorandum that would provide the blueprint for conservatives to wrest control back from the multiracial, working-class coalitions that had finally begun to bend the arc of American history toward justice. In the 8-page memo, Powell argued that the American economic system was, quote, under broad attack. The most disquieting voices, he said, were from perfectly respectable elements of society, from the college campus, the pulpit, the media, the intellectual and literary journals, the arts and sciences, and from politicians. Setting the rich against the poor, he wrote, is the cheapest and most dangerous kind of politics. So, in order to quash this movement, he argued, conservatives would have to mount a multi-pronged attack. Powell wrote that national television networks should be monitored to make sure big business wasn't subject to too much criticism, and complaints should be promptly reported to the FCC. Moreover, advertising dollars should be used not just to support specific products, but to promote the system, leading perhaps to the proliferation of children's cereal brands and cigarette ads that emphasized a bastardized notion of choice. To protect big business against the people, the business community would have to organize via the National Chamber of Commerce in much the same way workers had gained power through the National Labor Relations Board. To re-educate students, he advised the business community to establish a staff of highly qualified scholars to publish frequently to influence opinion. It goes without saying that he advised the business community to lobby politicians directly and heavily. And perhaps most significantly, he set out a plan to take over the courts. Did it work? Well, nearly 50 years later, the mainstream media is owned by a small handful of billionaires. Conservatives have cultivated crisis after fake crisis on college campuses. The Federalist Society has created a pipeline of right-wing judges that have taken over the federal judiciary. Unions have been gutted by anti-labor legislation embraced by conservative justices, and conservative ideologies with little to no basis in scholarship are accepted as scholastic truths. Riding this ship is going to take even more organization and planning than the Powell memo sparked. Daunting, I know. But lucky for us, the leading contender for the Democratic nomination is the one and only organizer-in-chief, Bernie Sanders. This week, I spoke to Jeffrey Sachs, a renowned economist and intellectual, about how our system of radical inequality is the result of a methodical, decades-long political project, not some historical inevitability. Sachs is a professor at Columbia, as well as an advisor to the United Nations. He recently endorsed Bernie as a progressive for all Americans across the political spectrum. Then, for a look behind the scenes of this surging campaign, I spoke to Ari Rabin-Havt, the campaign's deputy campaign manager, about how something like last fall's Queen's Rally comes about, hint, lots and lots of sweating the details, why Bernie rallies are such unique affairs, and becoming an Instagram influencer. So stick around. I am so excited and honored to be joined today by Jeffrey Sachs, a renowned economist and one of the foremost public thinkers, I'd say, that we have in this country. So thank you so much for coming by.
Well, I am thrilled to be with you.
Well, just last week, you released your Bernie Sanders endorsement video. And in it, you talk about some themes that are common in your work, but that we don't necessarily always hear from people who are economists. I think there's some people who treat this movement and the idea of a kind of a democratic socialist worldview as unserious. So help me to understand and help people who might be skeptical understand why you support this campaign.
Bernie is the only candidate that sees it as it is and is telling it as it is, which is that we could do so much more, so much better in this country, make people's lives so much better, and actually do it rather straightforwardly. Mm-hmm. And what I have found watching American politics and participating in it for a long time now, I won't give you the number of years, is that most Americans are on side on this. So what is sometimes called radical agenda is nothing like that when you look at what Americans really want. Mm-hmm. Americans know that the rich should pay more taxes. Americans know that the behavior of our corporations is absolutely unseemly. They're just taking, they're grabbing, they get bailed out, but they leave the bill for the rest of us. And Bernie understands all of this. Of course, he's been fighting on the right side all of these decades as inequality has widened and widened and widened. And it became a kind of almost a farce in our politics. You look at the 2017 tax cut. Yeah. Another giveaway, $1 trillion+ given away to the richest people in this country. The Republicans, who are completely shameless, of course, kept it a secret till the last moment. There were no hearings, no public debates. They just rammed it through because that's what the rich do with impunity, because they bought the political process. And Bernie's been on this point for years and years and years. Why are we where we are with so much inequality, with so many people suffering, with so many people unable to afford their prescription drugs, basic health care, and so forth? Not because Americans are crazy and self-destructive, but because American public opinion doesn't count when politics is owned and operated by the richest people in this country and by the most powerful corporate lobbies. So the way we got to where we are, in short, is that our political democracy was taken away from us by the powerful corporate lobbies. And this was a direct, premeditated assault on our democracy that started with the Chamber of Commerce in the 1970s, started with Lewis Powell.
The Powell memo. I love this.
Yes, who wrote a memo in 1971 saying we need to grab power for the businesses in this country. And he laid out how to do that. And one of the ways was money, corporate money. He was appointed to the Supreme Court by Richard Nixon, that glorious destroyer of democracy. And when Powell got his moment, he wrote the first Supreme Court decision that said, let the companies buy our political process in the phony name of corporate free speech. And from then, money has poured into the political system. Now, Bernie's getting money from small contributors, millions and millions of small contributors. But what has ailed us is that it's been big, bundled money, dark money, secret money, political action committee money, corporate lobbying, billions and billions of dollars over recent decades. And you watch, and I have watched in detail, year by year, how that has created more and more inequality, an unbelievably overpriced and unjust healthcare system, a dependency on big oil because Exxon, Chevron, you name it, they have owned the political process. That's why we have mega climate change right now. And then we're told, oh, you can't really do anything about that because the oil companies control the discourse.
Right.
So this is what has happened. Now, I travel all over the world. I see normal places where the political system isn't owned and operated by the corporate lobbies and by the billionaires. Places like Germany or places like Sweden or the Netherlands. And they're doing quite well, thank you. They don't have this unbelievable inequality. Everybody has health care. Everybody has weeks of vacation time. And then I come home after seeing this firsthand, what it means to have that kind of decent life. And then you read the propaganda of the Wall Street Journal or you hear on Fox News, oh, we don't want to be like them. Well, why not? And the reason is because to be like them means that the rich actually pay their taxes and the corporations actually are regulated rather than setting the regulations.
So that you made so many excellent points there. I want to backtrack a little bit because I don't think that it can be overemphasized the extent to which the kind of economic and political place that we're in today was a conscious, predetermined act, right? So I recall reading or learning about the Powell Memo in law school, and it really setting off a light bulb for me because there is this disjunction between understanding that, okay, you're telling me all these policies are popular. You're telling me that people like the things that Bernie are saying. Okay, I'm a little skeptical, but you're telling me the polls say that people like Medicare for all.
And they show
and they
it
like
overwhelmingly, exactly.
Of course, but people become skeptical of the polls because they say, well, how can that be? If everyone agrees, why don't we have the nice things?
Isn't that amazing? Because our political representation does not work.
Right.
I remember when one congresswoman in the heat of a debate about health care in front of me as I was discussing, put her face in her hands and just said, the lobbies, the lobbies, the lobbies. It was like the Joseph Conrad novel, the Darkness, the Heart of Darkness. How powerful this money is in corrupting our politics. And I am old enough to have lived through a lot of presidencies. I saw the turning point. The turning point came January 20th, 1981. I can tell you it's when Ronald Reagan became president, because that is when they really seized the power. Bust the unions, cut the taxes for the rich, deregulate, wreck the environmental movement, and really go after this corporate agenda. And because Lewis Powell had opened up the floodgates of corporate money, it turned out that this was a decisive shift of American politics. So I study trends as a macroeconomist. If you look at inequality in our country, inequality was falling in the 1960s with President Kennedy, with Lyndon Johnson. But then the turning point came decisively in the 1980s. That's when we started to become two Americas rather than one, with this massive widening. Bust the unions, because that was a conscious part of the strategy.
Right.
Bring in the corporate money. Get the Koch brothers to fund organizations all over the United States for tax cuts, deregulation, a right to work, bust the unions. It was a conscious campaign. It was not the American people demanding these things. Nothing like that.
Right.
It was a shift of politics, not a shift of attitudes of Americans.
Right.
We have reached the breaking point now. Americans do not want what is on offer. They've been saying election after election, we're on the wrong track. But then you look at opensecrets.org. I encourage everybody to go to that website and learn a little bit of the grim reality of our country. We have billions and billions of dollars from corporate money, corporate lobbies, the richest Americans, the bundlers that have driven what Washington does into a complete disregard of what Americans want.
Yeah.
That's why our country is so on edge.
Yeah.
And it's reached such a shocking crisis right now. Life expectancy in our country is falling. It's declined 3 years in a row. I study measures of well-being. So if you get past the national income, which is reported, say, on the Wall Street Journal front page, and ask how do Americans really feel about things, we have declining sense of well-being, rising anxiety, very serious disorders of course, epidemics of opioid addiction, rising suicides, and all of this, because we've been on this path for so long that politics is broken because it's bought.
Yeah.
And this is the decisive moment. Bernie has seen this. He's been saying it so clearly. He's the only one that understood it from the start, has been in the right direction, has been arguing so cogently and so knowledgeably about this. He's seen it absolutely firsthand and close up what these lobbies do to wreck the process in Washington. And he's got the only solution to this, actually, also, because you can't just wish it away. You have to create a movement that's going to take the democracy back from Wall Street, from big oil, from the healthcare industry, which is bankrupting America. And that's what he's doing.
So what do you say to the folks who are afraid of or skeptical of this notion of democratic socialism or social democracy, who say either it can never work here because America is just kind of fundamentally different from countries in Europe, or who say we don't want it to work here because the model that is being pointed to are countries like Venezuela?
Oh, come on. This has nothing to do with Venezuela. That is, of all the stupid lies that Donald Trump tells every day.
This is what we're going to get, right?
I know, but it's so grotesque. Come on.
So what do people need to know? We want to arm our listeners with the best defensive response to these kind of, empty, vapid arguments that are going to be thrown at us when we win this primary.
What Americans need to know is that the United States life expectancy now ranks 29th among the high-income countries. 29th. Listen, hear it. This is the United States of America. We are falling so far behind the leading countries. How many days of guaranteed maternal leave with a newborn do we have in the United States? That would be 0. How about in all the normal countries? I'm talking about Canada. I'm talking about Britain. I'm talking about Germany. I'm talking about Sweden. I'm talking about the Netherlands. I'm not talking about Venezuela. That is such a phony, cheap shot and lie. But the normal countries that we know, and they have weeks, months.
Yeah. My great Canadian friends, 6 months to a year.
Months.
Exactly, right.
They have guaranteed vacation time several weeks because they have a normal society where the billionaires don't own the politics.
Right. There are folks out there like, let's say, Steven Pinker, who say, I don't know why everyone's complaining. There are fewer poor people globally than there have been in the past. The overall global trends are up. There are fewer people living on less than $1 a day or what have you. There's no more bubonic plague. Things are on the up and up. And folks point to the GDP and strong overall economic growth and low unemployment rates. And they say Trump is doing great. Capitalism is doing great. Why are you complaining? How would you push back against that kind of a narrative?
I would say, in a sense, Steven Pinker is a very fine linguist. But to look at an average and misunderstand the inequality and the suffering, to ask how is it that America, the richest large economy in the world, has declining life expectancy, soaring suicides, epidemics of substance abuse, deaths of despair, and not be able to talk about that? But come on. Okay, his linguistics, very interesting. But honestly, let's look at realities in this country. Let's look at the fact that the United States has the highest inequality of any high-income country in the world in this OECD club. There's a group of the democratic rich countries, we're one of them, called the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. You can go online and look at the comparisons. And the United States just doesn't stack up, except the most relative poverty of any of these countries, the least worker rights of any of these countries, the most deficient healthcare coverage and the highest costs of healthcare coverage, the life expectancy way behind. And then you don't say, oh, the world's so wonderful. You say, how do we solve these problems? Right. How do we use our wealth and our know-how like we used to with Franklin Roosevelt or John F. Kennedy? How do we direct this for the common good, not just for the people at the top? That's what Bernie is pointing out. Yes, of course we can solve these problems. We are a rich country. We have this wondrous technology. But does it really have to just serve Jeff Bezos' $110 billion bank account right now? No, it doesn't. How about if Mr. Bezos actually paid taxes?
Right.
How about if he gave decent wages to his workers, which Bernie helped to push successfully? Then you start getting somewhere. But the name of the game is not to enrich Mr. Bezos even more. We've never seen fortunes like this. They make no sense in this world when people are struggling. And then Bezos goes around demanding tax cuts by all the cities. Who wants to host our HQ2? Well, you have to give us benefits. You have to promise tax cuts. So we don't want any unions and all the rest. Where does that come from? Not in a decent country.
Right.
And Bernie is the one saying, no, we're not going to go on like that. And we're not going to be hoodwinked by Fox News and Rupert Murdoch's media empire, which just tells lies every single day, when it's completely normal, if your political system is not bought by the rich, that people can have decent lives without committing suicide or having these terrible epidemics or struggling to fulfill prescription drugs and so on. I see it with my own eyes because I travel to these countries. I deal with their politicians. I deal with their regulators. And it's normal what Bernie's calling for. It's not radical. What's radical is what we have here. Government of the rich, by the rich, for the rich. That's radical in the wrong way. Bernie's mainstream. He's what is for the common good.
Right. Why do you think it is that so many European countries ended up on that path and ended up moving in the direction of stronger social democracies? And we got caught up, at least in the 1970s and early 80s, in this more direction where we have been deluded into thinking that trickle-down economics and, redistributing wealth up toward the wealthy was somehow going to benefit our society as a whole. Are there kind of historical reasons why we ended up here and they ended up there? And is there, because there are some people who would say that that divergence was kind of intrinsic and natural to our kind of national temperament. But are there other kind of factors that led to that divergence and that give us confidence that we can overcome it?
It's interesting. If you were to have looked at America in the early 1960s under JFK, my favorite president during my lifetime, or Lyndon Johnson in the War on Poverty, you would have not have made a difference between the U.S. And Europe or Canada at the time. The U.S. was a progressive society. Social democracy was a mainstream idea. It wasn't some crazy radical ideas the corporate media say. Nonsense. This is what the New Deal was. This is what Truman, even Eisenhower, by the way, kept on a basic line. But we had progressive legislation, And we had Medicare introduced, for example, in the 1960s. We had a war on poverty. We had the ideas of how to do this. So you would not have made any sharp difference. There's nothing intrinsic about the U.S. that makes it that we have to be governed by corporate oligarchies and lobbies as opposed to normal politics and democracy. We considered ourselves kind of a democratic country. What happened? A number of things happened. Our government blundered and cheated on Vietnam. We divided politically. We had high inflation in the 1970s, which undermined confidence. And we had Lewis Powell on a very conscious decision of the corporate sector. We're going to seize effective power, and they did. Ronald Reagan was a turning point, and you can see it even in statistics that social scientists make about the swerve to the right in the U.S. The U.S. went to the right, not because of a massive change of public opinion, but because Reagan narrowly won an election. He completely used a short-term crisis of inflation to attack fundamentally the role of government. His famous line in his inaugural address in 1981 is that government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem. What a horrible, wrong idea. Phony. But he was able to use that to sell deep tax cuts and an assault on the unions and an assault on environmental regulation and other kinds of regulations, even financial regulations, because he had a big savings and loan crisis, a very big financial crisis because of deregulation. What is a little hard to understand is why we didn't bounce back effectively. Unfortunately, what happened is a lot of the Democratic Party said, okay, we have to follow Reaganomics. We have to swerve to the right ourselves rather than holding the ground and saying this is not right. We're being encroached by big money and corporate interests. I watched it. I was very sad. The Democrats signed on to Wall Street, a lot of them. The corporate Democratic faction basically said, we have to be the weak version of Reaganomics. What a terrible mistake that was historically, because when Clinton was president, he triangulated. He cut a lot of benefits. He did a lot of things that you look at now and you say, oh my God, that is really a right-wing agenda. That's not a progressive agenda. And so we lost time and lost the political move. George W. Bush came in, more tax cuts. We know how cynical Cheney is, one of the most cynical people ever in politics in the United States. And he told Bush, okay, now we get more tax cuts. Bush wasn't so sure. Cheney said, we won. This is what we're going to do. So they just aggressively shifted politics to the rich. The money poured in. Citizens United opened the spigot even further than Powell's originally decision in Bellotti versus the First National Bank of Boston in 1978. And the money changed our politics so that we have, on the surface, a democracy. But in terms of how things are really working, we are a plutocracy right now. We are driven by money. The Republican Party completely sold out on everything. That's why you hear such nonsense day to day. They know the lies they're talking about, for example, on climate change. Every word is a lie, but they're paid by big oil. So that's how it works. The Democrats, unfortunately, got too close to Wall Street. The Democrats got too close to the huge money of the big healthcare industry. That's the biggest single sector in the United States. So you have even Democrats, of course, a lot of them spouting nonsense on Medicare for all, because the money that comes from the healthcare sector to the corporate, the campaign contributions in the Democratic Party too, it's vast. And that's why when Bernie is, not only does he get it, but he knows that the only way out of this is if there's really a movement of working people, small contributions, so that nobody's bought in this process, so that we can think straight and say, every other country figured this out. Don't you think the U.S. could figure this out also? I
think that point about what happened with the Democrats as well is really critical, because there are some people who hear, leftists, critique the Democratic Party or individual Democrats, and they say, well, come on, these are people on our team. They're good people. They're well-meaning. And they perceive it as a kind of an interpersonal attack rather than the structural attack it is. And I think one of the key points of that kind of Powell memo was also getting the media, establishing a foothold in the media. And this is a point that Ryan Grimm made when he came on the show many episodes ago, that as TV became a more primary vehicle for communicating with the masses, and TV advertisements were more expensive and more expensive, that the importance of having that corporate money became greater and greater as well. So there was this feedback loop where even if you felt like you wanted to ignore the money, you felt like at least you had to pay attention, or you had to be solicitous of it, because otherwise you were never going to get your point of view across. You were never going to be able to advertise and reach the people in the first instance. So then if you have a Democratic Party who has lost a series of elections over the course of the 80s, who say, okay, last-ditch effort, I think that we have to do is play their game. Now, I disagree with that choice. I think it was a wrong we're critiquing that choice, it's not that we're saying, I think that you're evil and bad and all of that. Is to say there was a structural problem that needed a structural solution, instead of kind of lowering yourself to the level of gameplay that was happening on the side of Republicans. And what we want is for people to recognize that there is another way, and that other way isn't the third way. It's to have confidence and faith that people are willing to give small dollar donations, and people are willing to come out and form a movement when you offer them policies and real genuine material change that will affect their lives and make them feel like they're not just getting incrementally better, but they have something real on the line, that their lives are on the line.
Exactly. It is a lot easier to go to a Wall Street bundler and say, I need some millions, than it is to win the confidence of millions of small donors who each give $20, $10, which is what Bernie is doing. Of course, it's very attractive. Bill Clinton went to Wall Street. He brought Wall Street into the Democratic Party. Robert Rubin came from an investment bank, went back to Citi, and in the meantime deregulated the financial sector and ended up contributing to the blow up of finance that occurred in 2008. But, tactically, okay, that's a lot of campaign funding that came into the Democratic Party. But in the end, what do you get out of it? You just don't get what's good for the American people.
And what's the point of winning at a certain point?
I just feel I've seen it close up, even with President Obama. Of course, I voted for him twice and was so thrilled and enthusiastic with his election victory in 2008. But who came in to handle the crisis? A lot of bankers, and that's why they were bailed out and they never really paid their dues and they stayed in power, and now they're abusing the system again. They got cheap credits and they're funding big oil. And so the old system continues right now because we didn't take the lessons. And we didn't take the lessons for the structural reasons that you're talking about. That is the easy approach, big bucks. It's expensive to run campaigns. Bernie's doing it the hard way. There's no question about it. But Bernie's doing it the only way that can really work.
I want to ask you about the Green New Deal, since you're an amazing advocate for it. Why is that such a kind of lightning rod for you? And why do you think that is such an important part of this movement?
Well, unfortunately, not for great news. You look at the mega fires in California. You look at Hurricane Maria. Thousands of people dying in Puerto Rico. You look at the massive flooding, the droughts. You look at the heat waves, and I see it all over the world in my work with the United Nations. Every place I go is in an ecological, environmental, climate-related crisis right now. It's shocking. For 14 years at Columbia University, I led the Earth Institute with hundreds of climate scientists. Just about every day, a great scientist would come up to me and say, Jeff, it's worse than we thought. It was very depressing, by the way, and very hard because these are brilliant people and they're telling us something and we were watching it with our own eyes, what's happening. So the Green New Deal is not something fun. It is something necessary. We need to protect ourselves from our self-made growing disaster on this planet. By the way, the U.S. economy is losing year in, year out, $100 billion to climate-related disasters this year, $150 billion. We're seeing so many mega disasters right now, and it's going to increase till we say, come on, stop. We cannot self-destruct this way. Now, what I know, also, having worked with engineers, not just the climate scientists, but the engineers who know how our power grid works, how automobiles work, and tell me a lot of interesting things. We can fix this problem. The whole idea of the Green New Deal is practical solutions so that our economy and society runs on a safe energy system. Wind, solar, hydro, geothermal. We can do that, and we can do it at low cost. Again, it's propaganda saying you can't do it. Recently, the head of BP, Bob Dudley, attacked Bernie and others. Oh, this Green New Deal. Are you kidding? BP. Well, yeah, okay. This is what big oil does for a living, is propaganda. This guy may actually not know when he says, oh, we need all kinds of energy. He may actually believe that, but he doesn't understand. He's in the oil business. Those who are in the sunshine business, solar power, those who are in the wind business, they know what we can do now because the technologies have improved so dramatically that solar is what's called at grid parity, or even better. In other words, it competes head on with coal or with gas. You have places in the United States where gas-fired electricity generation is just closing down, not because of public policy, but because solar power is cheaper. Now, Bernie, as usual, has gotten it completely right. Here's what we need to do for climate safety. And what is brilliant about the Green New Deal is that it fits perfectly with what Europe just announced. There's now a European Green Deal. I think people can go look it up online. Europe, that is the 27 countries of the European Union, have adopted an absolutely bold, clear strategy to get to climate neutrality, so-called, or zero emissions by 2050. And the U.S. and Europe should join together to get this done. And in fact, the whole world's going to do it. Bernie's going to lead the way to get the whole world to do it, in fact. Once again, you have corporate propaganda, and boy, oh boy, the oil industry is a propaganda-filled industry. It tells lies relentlessly, saying it can't be done. You have the Wall Street Journal every day absolutely telling lies. Sometimes I think the morning edition is just to make me mad. Then I realize other people are getting the same edition. But the truth of the matter is the Green New Deal is absolutely practical. It's going to keep Americans at work doing the right thing. It's going to save us from destruction. It fits what the rest of the world is doing and is going to have to do. It's the right thing to do. And we have to block out the propaganda and get on with the work. And what Bernie recognizes is it is like a moonshot, but a moonshot, we did it. And we'll do it with this one also. And the engineers are saying as clearly and explicitly as possible, we can do this one.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Your enthusiasm is infectious, and I can't wait to be on this journey with you to the presidency, to winning, and to changing the world for the better.
Bernie's going to do it, and we're going to be helping him. Fantastic.
Thank you, Dr. Sachs.
Suddenly, we have the Democratic establishment very nervous about this campaign. We got Wall Street nervous. We got the insurance companies nervous. We got the drug companies nervous. We got the fossil fuel industry nervous. We got the military-industrial complex nervous. We got the prison-industrial complex nervous. We got billionaires going on television crying that they're going to have to start paying their fair share of taxes. And they're starting to think, could this really happen? Could there really be a political movement in America which brings together blacks and whites and Latinos and Asian Americans and Native Americans, gay and straight, to stand up as working class people fighting for change? We are their worst nightmare. This is their nightmare on Elm Street.
So I'm joined today by Ari Rabin-Havt. When did you first start working with Senator Sanders?
Officially, February 2017. We first met in December 2016. I helped a lot in keeping him out on the road, doing rallies. In a lot of 2017, 2018 was about issues. Mm-hmm. So we would go out. We did a lot of events to defend the Affordable Care Act against mm-hmm. Donald Trump's attempts to cut 30 million people off their health care. And he went around the country, and people don't talk about this and it's ignored, but literally went around the country, went to West Virginia, went to Pennsylvania, went to a whole bunch of states and rallied people against it. And it was actually a very effective methodology. And he said, like, look, Bernie has always been for Medicare for all, but he's not going to stand by and let 30 million people get cut off their health care without going and doing something. And there were days in 2017, there was like a Wednesday once where I walked into his office and he was like, do you think we could do like 3 rallies Friday, Saturday? It's like, and in city and without any campaign apparatus or staff or this, and we would pull it together. And we had 1,400 people in Pittsburgh with the help of a lot of people on Friday night.
See, I think a lot of people, this is certainly the case for me, don't fully appreciate what goes into a rally. It just kind of feels like the principal shows up, people magically know where to be, and a rally happens. But talking to you and being on the campaign, it's been really interesting getting to know how much work the advance team or the people on the ground do and how much infrastructure goes into that. And I know that you are heavily involved in that aspect of it too. Sure. Can you give people a little bit of insight into what makes these events successful? I
mean, you just have to think that when you're putting together an event, there are 100 tiny details that have to be taken care of. And yes, there is a perception that an event is, there's a stage and there's a microphone and the principal gets up and talks. And, there's a process. And depending on where you are, there's permits. There's everything from fencing to stage to making sure. Look, the most important thing we think of at a rally, and we don't do some campaigns, for lack of a better term, do fancier rallies. We're more toned down very intentionally because that's who our candidate is. He just wants to connect with people, and that's his goal. So can you see the speaker? Can you hear the speaker? Can the camera see it? But also, can everyone in the audience share in the experience? How do you create a shared experience that communicates the message of the campaign? And we have some very good people on this campaign who work very, very hard with very little. You don't see them. They're not ever going to be on your TV, but work very, very hard to make that happen. And you think of, it's everything like you'd like to think presidential campaigns are about high-level policy conversations and deep strategy. Sometimes they're just about porta potties and fencing.
Well, it's that, but also there does seem to be this kind of artistry to it. When I reflect on the spectacular photographs from the Queen's rally in October, right?
Yes.
When I think of kind of the cinematic scope of the whole thing and how the setting really amplified how kind of resurgent the atmosphere was.
Which is the goal of an event. the setting goal is for the goal of a good setting and a good event is to amplify the message you want without being obtrusive to that message. Right? You don't want people to think the message isn't where like this venue, but the venue should amplify.
Yeah, you want to wear the dress.
And look,
you don't want the dress to wear you.
Sometimes it's hard. Like when you think about these things, like there's Queensbridge, which is like the pinnacle of rallies, 26,000 people, New York City, just a beautiful scene, perfect weather, which, you can't really, there are things you can't, you're just praying for good weather on an event like that. Not a cloud in the sky, great temperature, the bridge behind the New York skyline. And then also the crowd, just the massive crowd filling in. But an event is also just as important, and on this campaign is the event with 100 people in a small Iowa city of 200 people. We did an event early in the campaign, and I'm forgetting the name of the town, where it was a city of like 250 people and 300 people showed up to the event.
I remember that.
And those events are just it was like an old community meeting space. And those events are just as important as the big ones where, and every event, every state is different. Well, the way Bernie likes to think of an event is as a community meeting. So our events, 80% of the time have some musical element, be it, and typically, we have the big bands that come out, and there was some announcements today about big bands coming to do things. But like local musicians who are from the town who support Bernie coming out with their guitar to play. And he very much loves that. It's something because he thinks these events should be fun. In the summer, in New Hampshire and Iowa, we would do ice cream socials where you came, and in New Hampshire, Ben & Jerry at events would scoop your Ben & Jerry's ice cream. And he likes things like that where the community is coming together at a location. And there's something, the politics is about community. He wants to be in touch with people. If staff tries to prevent him from communicating directly with people, he will reject that.
Yeah, I mean, when I hear you talk about it, you can tell that you're a creative. And so I want to ask you about another side of this creativity, which is that when you're doing all of this, you're often taking pictures and have one of the kind of best Insta accounts.
On a Journey with Bernie. Let's count the follows.
You should definitely check it out.
On a Journey with Bernie.
It's definitely worth it.
Need the follows.
Because you have obviously access that a lot of people don't have, but more importantly, I think, is that you have an amazing eye.
I started taking pictures. I have a book of some of my pictures here. A lot of it is to remember different setups and settings and like get a sense of, and I started posting it in June. I forget who said it to me. They're like, why aren't you have an Instagram account? And I had like an Instagram account with like 100 or 200 followers that I had posted 5 times to since like 2008 or something.
Whenever Instagram started.
Whenever I got an Instagram, and I never used it. I was like, okay, I'll start posting a few pictures. And people like, look, it's not giant. It's like 7,000 or so followers. You guys can bring it up. Hear the burn. Let's get it to 8,000.
This whole episode is an elaborate ploy.
Elaborate ploy. No, and but I think there are things. There are photos that like inspire, and just highlight memories. Here, I'll pull one out right now. Okay. This, my favorite photo I've taken all campaign, and I think one that is, I don't know, is the Queensbridge.
This is gorgeous. Photo. So if you're listening to this, it's a picture from the New York rally.
From the New York rally. I have it in black and white. And the way it worked, the stage faced the bridge, and it was going over the top of the stage and over the crowd while AOC and Bernie had their arms in the air. And it was just this amazing moment on the campaign where, Bernie was back. We had these moments, and, we had problems, and we had got to a debate that was fairly successful. And then he came in at that rally and to Back in Black, which people liked. and it was a kind of cathartic moment here where it was like, wow. And look, it was a pretty incredible rally to pull off. And, our advance team did some remarkable work. And it's one of my favorite pictures. And then there are like, let's see, and this was a fun night. this is a different. So this was actually at the Minnesota State Fair, where we stopped by the arcade. There was actually this great night. There was actually this great night on the campaign where we were in the summer, where we had gone out and gotten ice cream. We'd walked from our hotel. We were walking kind of around the block, and I think it was Brian, our campaign photographer, pointed to this like great, who's from California, pointed to this great, like, he's like, oh, there's this like fun arcade over there. And like Bernie was like, okay, let's go. And he like walked into the arcade, just walked in and kind of rolled up to the skee ball machine and started throwing skee balls. And people around were like, wait a second, is Bernie Sanders playing? And then he walked up to the basketball game and started shooting baskets. And people around were like, wait, is that Bernie Sanders playing basketball at the arcade? And he was just hanging out at the arcade playing basketball.
Did anybody challenge him?
I don't think anybody challenged him. There was a certain level of excitement. It was like, it's not about the challenge. It's about all of us playing together for a common purpose of scoring more baskets.
Not me, us. I got it.
Not me, us. And getting more tickets for the prize booth.
See, people love to hear that those kinds of moments exist because it can seem kind of serious and overwhelming, and the stakes are in truth really high, but people are, I think, curious about the human element behind these campaigns. And the folks who support us give so much in terms of sharing their stories through My Bernie Stories, and people are remarkably forthcoming in those and on Twitter. And I always want to honor that and also share as much as possible about what we're doing kind of behind the scenes to the extent that we can, and to the extent that we don't detract, obviously, from the movement, which should be centered. So back to the campaign itself, yeah. I'm curious, people want kind of like a state of play. We're recording this about a week out from Iowa. Things have been shifting a lot recently, but we have benefited from some pretty good polls of late, national polls.
And I think people never let your emotions get dictated by polls. Because polls go up, polls go down. We had a good poll today from CNN nationally. That's great. It's good. You know what? You know what we got to do? We got to knock on doors, got to make phone calls. If you can chip in $27, chip in $27. Who knows what polls are accurate? I think it feels very good right now. I think the campaign feels very good. It feels like we have momentum. And I was talking to another staffer today who's been on a lot of campaigns, and we've been on a bunch of campaigns together. And we were talking about, there's a good feeling, right? And you get that. There's a feel in the air with these things. But that means you just have to work harder.
Right. I know.
Because we don't want people to get comfortable. 12 days to the Iowa caucuses. And we can win this thing. The question I hate more than anything else that I get out there is, are you going to win? Everybody, me, you, but every single person watching and listening to this podcast, every single person in this country gets to play a role in that decision. You are not powerless in that. So do you want to win? Then what can you do in the next 10 days to make the Iowa caucuses happen? And by the way, once Iowa's over, what can we do to make New Hampshire? What can we do to make Nevada and South Carolina? What can you do for Super Tuesday? What can you do to make sure Bernie Sanders defeats Donald Trump and becomes the next president of the United States? Yeah. Because, look, I tweeted out earlier this week. I woke up on January 20th. I was up on January 20th at midnight, and it got January 20th. I'm like, oh my God, 1 year from today, Bernie Sanders will be inaugurated president of the United States. But if you do the work. Right. And so, that's why it's not, I hate the are you going to win? Right. Well, you know what? You to help us decide that. So to that end, I went on Trap House a few weeks ago and talked about what we need people to do to win. And I think one of the biggest pieces of advice that our organizing department passed on, which is that I know a lot of people are very excited in their home states that might not be early states to start door knocking, because that feels like a way to engage really tangibly with your community. Right. But that right now, if you can, go make a Bernie journey, as we're calling them, to Iowa or to an early state. And door knock there if you want to door knock. But if not, please do sign up to make calls and text into early states instead. Yeah, look. Do what you're comfortable with what you can do. A lot of people can't travel
Right.
That's fine. Like, if you can't, that's great. But can you like take an hour in an evening and send texts? Can you make phone calls? Look, maybe you're too busy. Can you kick in $5? Can you like do what you can do?
Download the Bern app.
Download the Bern app. Like do the
contact
things
your friends
that you can do. And look, yes, if you have the ability to get out to Iowa or New Hampshire or South Carolina or Nevada and knock on doors, that's very important. If you're in a Super Tuesday state, it's also probably important you start knocking on doors there. But if you can't do that, anything you can do is helpful, and you shouldn't don't feel guilty about not being able to do more. Feel great about what you can do.
Certainly. I want to ask you, you mentioned that sometimes you get a feeling and that you're feeling good. I'm curious.
I'm feeling good right now.
You're feeling good in this moment.
But that doesn't mean anything other than that. What it means is work harder to get through the finish line.
What is something that the average person, doesn't really know about Bernie that you've had some insight into?
And I think people don't. This is something I don't even think Bernie would acknowledge. He's really funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's a very dry, very dry sense of humor, but is incredibly funny and pointed and it's hard to even recall because the humor is so dry, but you don't think of Bernie Sanders as a funny person. That's not.
He had that good little quip the other day where, he said that, my wife likes me on a good day.
Yeah, that's just a dry, quippy sense of humor, and he's he is super fast on his feet with that stuff, and I think people don't. And look, he's somebody who, and this is a mistake people make with Bernie. He doesn't like people who he perceives as being phony. He doesn't like people he perceives as kind of just doing it for some professional reason. He doesn't like hacks. He loves people. When there's somebody at an event giving a incredible speech about their life, which is his thing. It's when somebody gets up at an event and really shares their story about their life, he is personally very affected by that. And his actual love of people is something that gets discounted because he's viewed as, he doesn't like this. But what he tends not to like is the DC cocktail party circuit.
Right.
That he hates.
Singing happy birthday.
I don't like saying happy birthday. Right.
Well, do you think that I watch those town halls and there is something that feels almost therapeutic about them. People that feels confessional, people talking about very intimate moments in their lives, very difficult moments in their lives. Does it ever, stay with him? How does he unpack and release some of that?
Yeah, it does. It does stay with him, and moments do come back. People's stories, he will reflect back on them again and again and again and again. And when something really happens that requires kind of some intervention, we had this veteran who got up in Reno, he was post-rally, and nobody will ever see this, he was on the phone calling people, really affected to try to get this guy help. And he really, kind of keeping up with us, and did you make the phone call? Did you reach out? Did you take care of this? And, making sure that that's taken care of. And he, that it does personally impact him. And sometimes other things, just a funny moment. I'll give you guys a funny insight moment so he did De and Miro. And they showed him the Kanye shoes that were $11,000. So we left there. And I think for the next 2 days, there were probably a dozen times he turned to me in the car and would be like, those shoes really didn't cost $12,000, did they? No, they're Ari. There's no nobody's paying $12,000 for that shoe, right? I'd be like, no, those shoes on the resale market are $12,000. Come on. People, that's just not, he's like, that's just not good, Ari. That's a really bad thing.
Oh,
if people
man.
He's like, really?
Wait till someone starts pointing at women's handbags.
But he was he just could not. He was like, yeah, when I was growing up, he's like, the kids with money had Converse and we got Keds.
Oh, I loved Keds. Why do you think that there's still some people who are kind of hubristic about beating Trump, who don't seem to take the threats seriously, who kind of still treat him like the joke that they treated him as in 2016?
And I think that's always dangerous. People try to predict these things and be so sure and confident. And, people, it's there's work we can do. we have the power to make these decisions. So let's do it.
Yeah. I mean, psychologically, it feels to me like somehow it's, people don't like Trump.